Hello everyone, this is Julia from Craft Room Adventures. Thank you so much for joining me and welcome back to my Holiday Card Series 2019. This time I'm making a snowy scene card using the Nutty Or Nice stamp set by Simon Says Stamp and Fawn as part of the Stamptember exclusive set from last year. I stamped my images onto Bristol Smooth Cardstock by Strathmore, and now I'm just using Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers to color them in. This time I used Shadow Mauve and the blender pen to color in my snowman, and here I'm using the Nouveau Glitter Gloss to go over the snow part of my snowman to make it look sparkly. For the snowman's nose I'm using orange and a little bit of yellow, and for the stocking I'm using geranium red and deep red. I started out by using the deep red, blending that out with my blender pen, and then going in with the geranium red, which is more of a true Christmassy type of red. Now going back to my snowman using the same red shades, geranium red and deep red. Again, starting with the deep red, and I'm just working in layers as I usually do. Coloring in the darkest areas first, where I want the shading to be, and then blending them out with my blender pen. I'm just scribbling off any excess ink that's still on the blender to make sure I don't transfer too much ink. And now I'm moving on to the cute squirrels. For those, I'm using the color beige. I'm just placing the color where I think the natural shadows of my squirrel would be. I'm not the best at shading images, but I just try to add some depth by adding a little bit of shadow here and there. I'm using the same shade of beige for all of my images, and I'm just using the blender to blend out all of the colors. Again, adding a little bit of shading around the belly, the back, where the shadow would fall from the scarf, on top of the head and on the bottom of the tail of my squirrel, blending it out again, and then doing the same thing for my fourth square. Blending out the tail. There would be a shadow below his head, below his hands, and where his little feet are. For my nuts, I'm also using the color beige, and later I will add some dark brown to the top, also for those cute little pine cones. I think they're supposed to be pine cones. Correct me if I'm wrong. Again, adding a second layer of color there. Now I'm going in with my second layer for my squirrels to deepen up the shading. I'm using the pen to add color to the exact same areas as I did the first time, but the second layer just intensifies the color a little bit more. Now I'm adding a little bit of dark brown for the tops of the little nuts. And now I'm going back to my snowman. For the hat, I'm using natural gray. I'm just adding it to the outside so that it looks like there's a shine on the center, and also to the part that's right below the red band. I make sure to scribble off my blender a lot for this so that the center area stays a lot lighter than the rest. For the bow on the nuts, the scarves, and the hat, I'm using the same red combo as before because I wanted all of the images to match, which is deep red first, blending that out with my blender pen, and then going in with the more intense red shade geranium red. Or not really more intense, but more bright red. Again, making sure to just add color to the darkest areas and then lightly blending it out with my blender, scratching it off or scribbling it off in between to make sure I don't transfer too much color. And that finishes up the coloring. For my background, I'm using a piece of Bristol Smooth Cardstock by Strathmore, and I'm ink blending it with Tumbled Glass and Salty Ocean Distress Oxide ink. I started with Tumbled Glass to put down basically a base layer, and then for the outside edge I'm using Salty Ocean. Off camera, I die cut the Fawn stitched hillside backdrop in the portrait version. I die cut it 4 times out of white cardstock because I want to layer all of those on top of each other to create a little bit of dimension. I'm just intensifying the background using the Salty Ocean, and I'm always going back in with my lighter color to make sure it's all blended nicely. Here I'm just using a little bit of Tumbled Glass Oxide on the tops of the hills. I just added in some Hello Sweetums Post-it tape to protect my white background. And now I'm splattering some Lawn Fawn liquid stardust on my panel. I just diluted it with a little bit of water, and I'm using a brush to just put splatters all over my background. Now it's time to layer my die cuts. As I said, I die cut it 4 times, and I'm just using liquid glue to add them on top of each other. And now for my 4th and final layer, which is the one that I ink blended the Tumbled Glass on, which will be my front panel, or my front piece. Making sure it's all aligned. And now I'm just adding liquid glue to the back of my panel. I'm using the Nouveau Deluxe adhesive, and I'm placing my background onto it to glue it to the frame. Here I'm just playing around with the layout. I'm gluing the snowman's nose to one of my little squirrels. I'm using my reverse tweezers to hold it in place. And now it's time to stamp my sentiment. I'm placing my squirrel to see where my sentiment needs to go. And since I want to heat emboss my sentiment, I'm using some powder tool to remove any static cling. And I'm using my Versamark ink pad to ink up my stamp. Off to the side, my heat gun is already heating up, and I'm using my Arranger embossing powder in silver in the super fine version. Now that my heat gun is good and hot, I'm just taking it to the paper and running it over until it's smooth and shiny. Now it's time to add my images. I added foam squares to the back of all of them. I'm removing the backing sheets and placing them down on my paper. Here I'm struggling a tiny bit because I wanted to get the branch adhered to the edge of my frame so that it looks like it's growing out of there. Now I'm just placing in my first little squirrel. The snowman will go in the center, and I wanted to stick him down, but then I remembered that since I propped up 4 layers of the frame, I needed to add another foam square behind the hat to make sure he's level. And now I can just stick him down in the center. Now the squirrel that's holding the snowman's nose. Again, using a second layer of foam square to make sure it accounts for the 4 layers of the background. Now I'm just trying to find a place for the little nut with a bow. Or is it a pine cone? I don't know. I decided to have it in the center. Now I'm moving up my snowman again because he was just a little bit too low. The background looked a tiny bit too empty for me, so I'm just moving my images up a little bit. I really like that foam squares are forgiving like that. And now I'm just playing around with the last few images. I decided not to use the little stocking because I couldn't find a good place for it to go. I will just keep that for another project. I will add another foam square to the second nut, just placing it into the snow. And then I will add here the tiny pine cone with some liquid glue. And that finishes off my scene for today. The liquid stardust gives such a gorgeous shine. In person, it's even more beautiful. I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching. I would love it if you would consider subscribing to my channel for more crafty videos. On screen, I will have 2 more videos linked that may interest you. Have a wonderful day. Bye!